Hope you are as well.
About today on Sex 101.
Well, this is sex memory from the Judeo Christian tradition. Is that the unbreakable bond? And this topic was introduced by Tamara on Substack, and I wanted to respond to it and make some comments. So she's able to define sex, or try to, which seems simple enough. Thereafter, consider her thesis that sex involves memory and an unbreakable bond. At first glance, I'm with her on the memory part, since sex is one of the most memorable experiences that people have, but unbreakable, I'm not sure. But in any case, she says, quote, sex is a sacred exchange, a merging of energies that transcends the physical body. When I think about the idea that sex is a sacred exchange, a merging of energies that transcends the physical body, I can see how this might vibe with some parts of the Judeo Christian tradition, but it doesn't quite line up with the core of it. In this tradition, sex is not just a free for all energy swap, it's got a specific purpose and boundary. So, classic verse here is Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That one flesh bit hints at something deep, sure, but it's tied to marriage, a covenant blessed by God. For me, the sentence feels more like a New Age spin. Sacred, yes, but floating loose from the structure Judaism and Christianity slap on it. Digging deeper, I'd say thinkers like Augustine would raise an eyebrow at this. He was all about sex being holy, but only in the right box, marriage, and even here, he was skeptical of the passion part. In the City of God, he argues lust can mess with our focus on God, saying, the carnal pleasures of the flesh is a thing which the mind can never enjoy without some abandonment of cautious control. That merging of energies idea, Augustine might call it a distraction from the soul's real gig, pointing upward, not swirling around in some cosmic dance. The sentence I started with feels too mystical, too unmoored from his view of sex as a means to an end of procreation and unity rather than an end in itself. Still, I can't totally toss it out. There's a thread in the tradition that nods to the sacredness of the body. Paul in 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20 says, your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Glorify God in your body. Sex and marriage could be seen as a holy act, a kind of energy exchange under God's roof, but that transcends the physical part. It's a stretch. Judeo Christianity keeps it grounded. Sacred, yeah, but not in some out of body spiritual trip. In conclusion, that sentence feels like it's reaching for something the tradition doesn't fully embrace.
Mr. Mick, what is a metaphysical about sex?
Tamara states sex is not simply a transaction of pleasure, but an alchemical union where two souls intertwine, leaving traces on each other that linger far beyond the act itself. While I read Tamara's take on sex, I can't help but feeling it's a beautiful thought, one I might even vibe with personally, but it doesn't quite fit the Judeo Christian mold. This tradition doesn't see sex as some mystical or soul blending experiment. Genesis 2:24 pops into my head again, the two shall become one flesh. Sure, there's unity, a deep bond, but it's framed in the physical and covenantal marriage under God's design, not an alchemical free-for-all. Tamara's words feel more like they're dancing in a spiritual realm the tradition doesn't fully step into. Then there's Augustine, who'd probably squint hard at this. He wasn't big on sex being a soul melding party. In Confessions, he wrestles with his own past, calling lust a chain that drags the spirit down, writing, I was bound not by iron, but by my own will. For him, sex is sacred only when it's reined in, tied to marriage and procreation, not some lingering soul trace thing. Tamara's alchemical union sounds too esoteric, like it's turning sex into a cosmic ritual, while Augustine's keeping it practical. It's a human act blessed in the right context, but not a doorway to some eternal soul merge. That said, I could see a sliver of overlap. Paul's got that line in 1 Corinthians 6:16 through 17. He who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her, but he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. There's a hint that sex leaves a mark, a connection beyond the physical. But even there, it's a warning, not a celebration, and it's still not about souls intertwining in some alchemical glow. In conclusion, Tamara's statement feels like it's reaching past what Judeo Christianity offers, chasing a poetic transcendence the tradition keeps firmly earthbound.
Mr. Mick, this is a big question. Is sex communion?
Tamara, in full, believes, quote, this exchange exists outside of time, touching realms we may not consciously understand. Whether we acknowledge it or not, each encounter carries spiritual weight, shaping the essence of who we are. It is a communion, a ritual that has the power to elevate or diminish, depending on the intentions and awareness brought into it. Close quote. I can't help but it's a stretch from the Judeo Christian perspective. This tradition keeps things pretty grounded. Sex isn't some timeless mystical portal. Look at Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply. It's a command with a purpose tied to the here and now of building families and communities under God's plan. Sure, it's sacred in marriage, but the notion of it reaching into unknowable realms, that feels more like something I hear in a meditation circle than in a synagogue or church. The tradition's more about order than cosmic mystery. Then there's that bit about each encounter carrying spiritual weight, shaping the essence of who we are. I get where it's coming from. Paul's got a take in 1 Corinthians 6:18 that hits close. Flee from sexual immorality. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. There's a sense that sex isn't just casual, it leaves a mark. But the Judeo Christian spin isn't about some ethereal essence shaping, it's moral, practical. Thinkers like Aquinas would back this up. He saw sex as a natural act, good when it's aimed at procreation and unity in marriage, but not a soul altering ritual. The statement's spiritual weight feels heavier, more abstract than the tradition's focus on right and wrong conduct. Finally, calling it a communion, a ritual that has the power to elevate or diminish depending on intent, that's where I see the biggest gap. In Christianity, communion's a loaded word. Think the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, a sacred act tied to Christ. Sex doesn't get that label. Sure, Song of Solomon celebrates it poetically, but it's still within marriage, not a free floating ritual. Intent matters. Leviticus 18 lays out strict rules, but the elevating or diminishing isn't about awareness, it's about obedience to God's law. In conclusion, this statement soaring into a spiritual stratosphere the Judeo Christian tradition keeps tethered on earth.
Mr. Mick, what's the difference between sex for a woman and a man?
Tamara contrasts the difference between two genders. For a woman, sex can feel like an act of opening, a sacred invitation for energy to enter her being. For a man, sex is both a giving and a taking. Tamara's statement highlights a perceived distinction between male and female experiences of sexuality, framing women's experience as receptive and sacred, and man's as both active and acquisitive. This perspective resonates with ideas found in the Judeo Christian tradition and has been explored by various thinkers, both religious and intellectual, who have reflected on gender, sexuality, and their spiritual dimensions. In the Judeo Christian tradition, the notion of sexuality as a sacred act with distinct gender roles can be traced to Genesis 2:24. Once again, this verse suggests a union where the male and female roles complement each other, often interpreted as the man initiating and the woman receiving. Early Christian thinker Augustine of Hippo, in his City of God, Book 14, discusses the body and the soul's interplay in sexuality, emphasizing that the act, while physical, carries profound spiritual weight. Augustine sees the woman's role as one of receptivity tied to her capacity to bear life, which aligns with Tamara's idea of opening as a sacred invitation. Thomas Aquinas, a towering figure in Christian philosophy, further elaborates on this in his Summa. He argues that the woman's body is designed for generation with a natural passivity that complements the man's active role in procreation. While Aquinas' view is rooted in medieval biology, his framing of woman as receptive and man as generative echoes Tamara's contrast, sex as a giving and a taking for men and an opening for women. Aquinas imbues this with theological significance, seeing it as part of God's ordered creation. Moving to more modern thinkers within or influenced by this tradition, C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves explores eros as a force that binds genders to differently. He writes, the man's love is of giving, the woman's of receiving, but this is not mere passivity, it is an active welcoming. Lewis's perspective softens the dichotomy, suggesting that the woman's receptivity is not merely passive, but an intentional act, akin to Tamara's sacred invitation. For Lewis, the man's giving is an outpouring, yet he acknowledges a reciprocal dynamic where both genders participate in a mutual exchange, though experienced distinctly. Intellectuals outside strict theology have also weighed in. Psychologist Carl Jung, though not explicitly Judeo Christian, drew on archetypal imagery resonant with this tradition. In Psychology and Alchemy, he describes the feminine as the vessel or anima receiving or transforming energy, while the masculine animus projects and penetrates. Jung's symbolic language aligns with Tamara's depiction of women opening to energy and men giving and taking, suggesting a deeper psychological underpinning these gendered experiences. Conversely, Simone de Beauvoir in the second act, Second Sex, critiques such distinctions as reductive. She argues one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, challenging the idea that receptivity is an inherent female trait. While this is not Judeo Christian herself, she is not one. She critique engages with the tradition's legacy, questioning whether Tamara's framing romanticizes biological or cultural roles rather than reflecting an essential truth. Tamara's statement thus finds echoes in Judeo Christian thought. Genesis' complementarity, Augustine's spiritualized roles, Aquinas' ordered design, and Lewis's dynamic interplay, while modern intellectuals like Jung amplify its symbolic depth and de Beauvoir pushes back against its universality. In conclusion, these perspectives reveal a rich, contested terrain around gender and sexuality in the tradition.
What are the spiritual consequences of sex, Mr. Mick?
Tamara points out the spiritual significance of sex, but we can dive a bit deeper and explain the activity from the Judeo Christian point of view. In this tradition, the spiritual significance of sex is deeply rooted in the understanding of the human person as a unity of body and soul created in the image of God, Genesis 2:24, suggesting that sexual union is not merely a physical act, but a profound spiritual bonding. Theologian Thomas Aquinas, in his same famous Summa Theologica, expands on this by arguing that the conjugal act, when aligned with its natural end of procreation and unity within marriage, participates in divine order and reflects God's creative love. This aligns with the idea that every sexual encounter carries inescapable spiritual consequences, shaping the participant's inner being. For Aquinas, the act is a prayer in the sense that it either honors or dishonors the sacred design, leaving echoes, whether uplifting or burdensome, that linger in the soul's fabric. The notion of carrying invisible threads from past lovers resonates with the insights of Augustine of Hippo, who grappled with this enduring impact of his own sexual history in his Confessions. He writes, "My soul was a burden, bruised and bleeding. I carried within me a tattered soul," reflecting on how his past relationships left spiritual imprints that entangled him until he sought redemption. This echoes the statement's call for discernment as an act of self respect. Jewish philosopher Martin Buber in I and Thou further illuminates this by suggesting that human encounters, including sexual ones, can either elevate us towards the divine thou or reduce others to mere objects, entangling us in a web of diminished energy. For Buber, the spiritual stakes of intimacy demand intentionality, lest we bind ourselves to energies that weigh us down rather than illuminate our path. Finally, the idea that sex without spiritual awareness is like playing with fire while blindfolded finds a parallel in the writings of C.S. Lewis, who in The Four Loves describes Eros as a force that can either divinize or destroy. He warns love, having become a god, becomes a demon if not tempered by charity and awareness of its transcendent purpose. This mirrors the statement's assertion that awareness transforms sex into a holy act of creation. Similarly, Pope John Paul II's theology of the body emphasizes that sexual union is a sacrament of God's love, a deliberate emerging that imprints beauty and healing on the soul when approached with reverence. In conclusion, far from being mere physical release, it bursts a new energy that ripples into eternity, affirming the statement's vision of sex as a spiritual canvas where the divine and human interact.
Well, this is another question that I consider as a big question. Is sex a conversation?
Well, Tamara maintains that sex is also a conversation, a silent yet profound exchange of truths that words cannot capture. In this dialogue, the body speaks a language of intention, vulnerability, and trust, while the soul listens and responds in kind. The rhythm of this exchange reveals more than we often allow ourselves to see: our fears, our unspoken wounds, our capacity for love. When approached without awareness, these truths can remain hidden, overshadowed by fleeting physical pleasure. But when met with mindfulness, sex becomes an opportunity to strip away illusions and confront the raw, unvarnished essence of who we are. It is through this surrender that we access profound healing, as intimacy holds the power to dissolve the walls we build within ourselves. And that's the end of that quote. Tamara's assertion that resonates deeply with the Judeo Christian tradition view of body and soul is intertwined in a sacred dialogue. Genesis 2:24 is that one flesh. Adam and Eve's nakedness were not ashamed, suggesting an original state of vulnerability that trust mirrors Tamara's language of intention. Theologian Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica ties this to the idea that sexual union, when ordered toward unity and procreation, reflects divine intention, a conversation not just between bodies, but God's creative will. Yet Tamara's emphasis on a silent exchange beyond words could be critiqued as overly subjective. Augustine of Hippo in Confessions warns that unchecked passions can distort this dialogue, turning it into a monologue of self gratification unless anchored in grace. Her focus on mindfulness aligns with Aquinas' call for intentionality, but the tradition insists this awareness must include a moral telos, lest the truths revealed devolve into mere sentiment. The depth of her claim that sex with awareness strips away illusions and heals finds echoes and tensions in Judeo Christian thought. C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves describes Eros as a force that makes us take off our clothes and our disguises, along with her notion of confronting the raw, unvarnished essence of who we are. This surrender for Lewis can be redemptive when it mirrors Christ's self-giving love, as Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. However, Tamara's framing risks romanticizing the act without addressing sin's shadow. John Paul II's theology of the body insists that intimacy's healing power stems from its sacramental nature, a mutual gift that reflects divine communion, not just personal revelation. Her dissolving walls evoke Psalm 51:17, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. But the tradition would argue this healing requires a transcendent orientation toward God, beyond the self's capacity alone. In conclusion, while Tamara captures the relational and transformative potential of sex, the Judeo Christian lens demands a broader eschatological or end game context to fully ground it.
Indeed. So, Mr. Mick, is sex an energy exchange?
Tamara states, moreover, sex is a form of energy exchange that resonates far beyond the bedroom. The energy we bring into intimacy does not dissipate after the act, it lingers, shaping our emotional and spiritual landscapes. When we engage in sex rooted in love, respect, and authenticity, we create vibrations that elevate both ourselves and our partners. These ripples extend outward, influencing how we move through the world, how we relate to others, and how we perceive ourselves. Conversely, encounters driven by ego, manipulation, or detachment create energetic dissonance, leaving behind traces of disharmony that can seep into other aspects of our lives. In this way, sex is not merely an isolated event, but a thread woven into greater tapestry of our existence. Close quote. The idea that sex is a form of energy exchange finds a compelling parallel in the Judeo Christian tradition of understanding human acts as bearing eternal weight. Genesis 1:27-28. So God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them, and God blessed them. Frames sexuality as a divine gift with a purpose that transcends the physical, echoing the notion of lingering energy shaping our emotional and spiritual landscapes. Theologian Thomas Aquinas argues that human actions, including sexual ones, are ordered towards an ultimate end, union with God, suggesting that love rooted intimacy creates vibrations that elevate by aligning with this divine. Yet the tradition might critique the text's broad energy concept as vague. Augustine in City of God warns that disordered desires, ego, or manipulation fracture this harmony, producing not just dissonance, but sin that ripples into eternity. The text's outward influence aligns with Aquinas' view, but the Judeo Christian lens insists on a moral clarity to define what elevates versus what distorts. The assertion that sex weaves a thread into the greater tapestry of our existence deepens with Judeo Christian insights into relational and cosmic consequences. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity posits that sexual union either binds us in a glorious unity or scatters us in fragmentation, reflecting the text's contrast between authentic love and detachment. His image of one flesh from Mark 10:8 underscores a lasting imprint. John Paul II's theology of the body further enriches this, teaching that sex as a language of the body speaks truth or falsehood, shaping our spiritual identity and communal bonds. Encounters rooted in respect mirror Christ's self donation, Ephesians 5:2, while ego driven acts sow disharmony, akin to Psalm 38:8. I am utterly spent and crushed. The text's energetic dissonance lacks the tradition's explicit redemptive framework, where confession and grace mend the tapestry, but its ripple effects resonates with the biblical call to holiness in all its acts. In conclusion, while the text captures sex pervasive influence, Judeo Christian thought anchors it in a narrative of creation, fall, and restoration, offering a richer tapestry of meaning.
Is sex merely physical or deeper with a mental connection, Mr. Meg?
Well, Tamara maintains that sex, she says, for me is never random, something that can't be untangled from the mind and reduced to mere physicality. It's not the spark of attraction that ignites the fire, but the depth of mental connection that sustains it. I cannot desire someone in the absence of intellectual alchemy, the kind that sets the mind ablaze long before hands ever meet. So the text's insistence that sex is never random or inseparable from intellectual alchemy finds a profound echo in the Judeo-Christian tradition emphasis on the unity of body, mind, and soul in intimate acts in Genesis 2:24. The mental connection, rather than fleeting attraction, ignites true desire. Thomas Aquinas in Summa underscores that the rational soul governs human acts, including sex, suggesting that a mind ablaze with wit and depth elevates the act towards its divine purpose of unity. Yet the tradition might critique the text's heavy reliance on intellectual chemistry as incomplete. Augustine in Confessions reflects on his own past, where mental allure without spiritual grounding led to hollow pursuits, warning that even sharp minds can lack the moral depth needed for true lovemaking. The Judeo Christian lens thus enriches this by demanding a synergy of intellect and virtue, not just intrigue. The shift from sex to lovemaking as a song where he is the music, I am the lyrics resonates with the tradition's poetic and relational vision, yet invites expansion. C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves describes Eros as a duet requiring mutual giving akin to the text's interplay of music and lyrics, but he roots it in agape, selfless love drawn from 1 Corinthians 13:4 through 7. Love is patient, love is kind. This suggests that the cadence of thoughts and unsolved mystery the author craves must harmonize with a sacrificial depth to avoid becoming a self focused melody. John Paul II's theology of the body further frames this as nuptial meaning of the body, where intellectual and physical union reflect God's creative love, not just personal fulfillment. The hollow echo in Tamara's text aligns with Psalm 139:14. I am fearfully and wonderfully made, implying that reducing sex to physicality betrays our complex design. In conclusion, the Judeo Christian tradition thus deepens the author's vision by weaving intellectual chemistry into a tapestry of divine purpose where lovemaking becomes a sacred composition, not just a personal symphony.
Yes, indeed, not just a personal symphony. Is sex a level beyond conscious understanding?
Tamara believes, and then there is the rarest of all things, the kind of sexual connection that defies time, logic, and even reason itself. Some lovers are so inextricably bound by chemistry that no other body, no other touch could ever replicate the electricity beyond them. So the text portrayal of sexual connection, that's rare, predestined fusion, finds a striking resonance in the Judeo-Christian tradition and view of love as unity as transcendent. Song of Solomon 8:6-8 captures this intensity. Set me as a seal upon your heart. For love is strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. Many waters cannot quench love. This biblical poetry mirrors the electricity and haunting beauty of an unrepeatable bond, suggesting a divine imprint on certain connections. Thomas Aquinas describes love's ecstasy as a union that transcends mere reason, aligning with the text beyond conscious understanding. Yet he insists this ecstasy finds its full expression when ordered towards God. The tradition might critique the text's fatalistic tone. Augustine in City of God warns that earthly loves, even profound ones, can become idolatrous if they eclipse the eternal, suggesting this curse arises from clinging to a temporal gift without its divine context. The notion of a singular connection etched into the fabric of their being, lingering like a phantom touch, deepens through Judeo Christian lenses of covenant and memory. C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves speaks of Eros as a force that makes a man really want not a woman, but one particular woman, echoing the text's unrepeatable specificity. John Paul II's theology of the body further posits that such a bond reflects the soul's capacity for eternal communion, a predestined echo of God's love for humanity in Ephesians 5:31-32. The text's gift and curse tension aligns with Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has set eternity in the human heart, implying that this longing for an irreplaceable other hints at a divine design, yet its haunting permanence without resolution risks despair. In conclusion, the Judeo Christian tradition thus amplifies by framing such a connection as a signpost to the eternal, where its beauty is fulfilled not in isolation, but in a greater tapestry of redemption, tempering the curse with hope.
Tempering the curse. Is sex a truth teller, Mr. Mick?
According to Tamara, ultimately, sex is not merely a physical act, nor even just an emotional one. It's a truth teller, a mirror reflecting not only our desires, but our truest selves. It unveils, binds, and reveals, confronting us with our vulnerabilities, our longings, and our shadows, which we often keep hidden. So the text depiction of sex as a truth teller and a mirror reflecting our truest selves aligns powerfully with the Judeo-Christian tradition view of sexuality as a revelatory act intertwined with divine purpose. Genesis 2:25, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed, portrays an original intimacy that unveils vulnerability and truth, much like the text bridge between souls. Thomas Aquinas asserts that sex, while aligned with reason and virtue, reflects the soul's orientation towards God, revealing our capacity for love and connection. Yet he'd critique the text's ambiguity, noting that without moral grounding, this mirror can distort into deception, as Augustine warns in Confessions, where lust obscured his own truth. The tradition thus deepens the text's call for reverence, framing sex as a sacred language that, per Song of Solomon 4:19, ravishes the heart when spoken authentically, binding us in a way that honors our created dignity. The assertion that true intimacy lies in mutual recognition, honored as a sacred act, finds rich expansion in Judeo Christian thought, where sex becomes a participation in the divine. John Paul II's theology of the body describes it as a sacrament of the person, a physical echo of God's love. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity adds that such intimacy either forges a heavenly unity or a hellish fracture, reflecting the text dichotomy of elevation or emptiness. His lens roots this in 1 Corinthians 6:17. He who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. The tradition might challenge the text's focus on self-shaping as primary, suggesting instead that honoring sex as sacred honors God first, per Psalm 139:14. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. In conclusion, this reframes the choice not just as personal power, but as a response to divine design, where intimacy's truth unveils not only ourselves, but our Creator, offering a fuller transcendence than the text alone envisions.
Indeed, Mr. Mick, very well said. Beautifully articulated. And as Mr. Mick saying, the notion of unbreakable bond between sex and memory in the Judeo-Christian traditions hinges on its theological framing of sexuality as both sacred and conventional. From Genesis, Adamic union, where Adam and Eve's intimacy is intertwined with their fall into moral awareness. Mr. Mick, another great episode, another great week on Sex 101. Would you like to plug in something?
Sure, if you don't mind, I'm the Idea to Author Coach on Facebook, where we help people write books and sell more books. You can also listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast and also pick up a couple of volumes that I've put out, available on Amazon. On Track Ian Hunter and Burning America, the Best Interest of the Children. Thanks you once again, Mr. Daniel.
Yes, people, I want to invite you to please do listen to our new baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Now, Mental Health 101 is created to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mick, thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Until next time, Deus Volt.
Monicam people, see you soon.